new episode on the use of the ConceptBase system for domain-specific modeling, meta-modeling, and method engineering. Today we focus on the notion of attributes and relations in the underlying data model of ConceptBase, which is called telos, or more specifically OTelos. It is object-oriented, but it is a bit different from the UML notion of classes and objects. So let's give you some examples, and then you should hopefully see how attributes are first defined at the class level and then used at the instance level. Keep in mind that ConceptBase supports any number of abstraction levels, so objects, classes, meta-classes, meta-meta-classes, and even a level that is parallel to this hierarchy of abstraction levels, the so-called omega level. But we will have some simple examples to start with here. So that's the user interface. Let's make it a bit larger, the font, and start with a simple employee example. Employee in class. So being in a class in ConceptBase just means that you can define so-called rules and constraints, which we do not need at the moment, but just to give you an idea. So let's say person has a name, which is a string, and works for project. And in UML, you would call this attribute at line number 3 a proper attribute. So the name has a value which is a string. Other attributes may have other types like integer or floating point or a date or so. The meaning of such values is given by the way how you write down the values. The second one here is also on this category attribute, but this would be called a relation or association in UML and classical data modeling approaches. In ConceptBase, they are all subsumed under this category attribute, which is given. It is defined at the most general object called proposition. So any instance, any object like employee can use it. So let's tell that. Oh, we did not define project. So let's define project in class with attribute maybe budget is an integer. So integer, string, real are some of the predefined types of values. Now it works. Whenever we press the tell button, the definitions here are passed to the so-called ConceptBase server. If I would press it again, it would not complain because there's nothing new, but you can incrementally add information to this. It will only store the new information. Let's make an instance of employee, Mary in employee. So note that now Mary is an instance of employee that we defined here, but otherwise it's just an object So now that Mary is an employee, it can use these attribute categories, attributes that are defined at the class level. So we instantiate that by writing down the label and yeah, maybe we give it Mary's name. We give it a local name for this attribute. We call that we call Mary maybe Mary Miller. Now this is just a single value. In general, attributes in ConceptBase can have multiple values, like first name, second name, alias name. They would all be under the category name, could all be under category name. For a project, we see how that may be useful. So P1 is the first project. We can just have a running number that we increment to distinguish the different projects. So that may be super programming something like this. So that may be the first project, and P2 may be reorganization yeah, 2021, maybe two different projects of Mary. Like before, we have to define these in project, and I'm a bit lazy and don't define the budget yet because yeah, not all attribute categories have to be instantiated unless you declare them to be necessary. That is similar to cardinality constraints that you have in UML. So if you don't specify that, then they are just 0 to star cardinality in Telos. So there's also a project. So let's tell that to the database. Another unable to find an object. I just see we misspelled here the attribute category. It has to be works for. So let's tell that, and now it's fine. So these labels here are local for the definition of the object Mary. And if you have multiple fillers for this works for, then you usually can use this running number. P1, first project to define, P2, second one. If it's just a single value, then maybe a user-defined value is fine, but you could also call it name1 instead of Mary name. Good, so let's visualize that. So that's our object Mary. And let's show all the attributes of Mary, the two projects and Mary's name. Mary is instance of employee. This is instance of project. The green links are instantiation links. Yeah, this is also an instance of project. And well, Mary Miller is instance of string. We don't look at that. That's the representation of the works for relation. And let's see what the instances of that are. So that's exactly the P1 attribute of Mary and the P2, so the two projects. So there are instances of that. So that concludes this little episode. Yeah, so memorize that these local names are just names that are local for the object in which they are used. This is the target object or the value for an attribute or for a relation. So here Mary works for superprogramming and Mary works for reorganization. That is a so-called multi-valued relation. We have several fillers for Mary. So these are not objects, but the labels of links, like we saw here. So this P2 is a label of the link between Mary and reorganization 2021. In the syntax of the Telos editor, this is indicated um, by the exclamation mark syntax. So employee works for example. Good. Thank you for attending, and yeah, see you soon.